Welcome to Season 4 of the Knack for Business podcast.
Question of the audience. How do you stay focused on growing your business when family turmoil and personal loss keep pulling you off track? Dorina will share how to rebuild focus, peace, and resilience when life outside of work feels overwhelming. She'll pack how the Rosetto effect, deep family and community connection, can restore clarity and energy for entrepreneurs. Our guest today is Dorina Lentella from Dorina's Kitchen. Dorina lives in Rosetto del Fattore, Italy, the birthplace of the renowned Rosetto effect. A former soccer player and lifelong coach, she seamlessly transitioned from sports to life coaching, driven by her passion for fostering happiness and connection. Dorina's mission is to revitalize the Rosetto effect, promoting the idea that a connected family unit leads to happier, more productive individuals. With 6 kids, Dorina understands firsthand the profound impact of a harmonious home environment on overall well being and success in life. Join us as she shares her journey and insights on creating positive change in the world through community and family connections. Dorina, welcome back. Absolute pleasure to have you here. And do you have a favorite quote or saying?
Favorite quote or saying, well, hopefully in the end, this will tie it all together. One of them that has kind of come back to the forefront for me recently is if you can't find the sunshine, be the sunshine. So that's what
So,
I try to do.
so in the last year, in 2025, you've had multiple family crises that have rolled through your life. How do you view success now? Because that's kind of taking, kind of knocked you off the rails. How do you view success now? And how did you get back on the rails?
Well, thank you for bringing all this up and giving me this opportunity to share this because I hope that maybe it'll help somebody. The thing is, we lost my first grandbaby just before she was to be born with a ruptured placenta. So that started off the earlier part of the year. And then we lost my dad this summer. And so it was just a real and of course, I did have a grandson born just a few weeks after we lost the first baby. So it was a real roller coaster of emotional year. Absolutely just up, down, inside out. As far as success in coming, from this stuff, I think that the fact that I raised my family in the way that we're gonna talk about here. We were all here, everybody rallied, and I think that when you can come together as a family, that itself teaches you and hopefully by observing teaches others how just being united on the family front makes everything else succeed. So when we lost the baby, my one son flew in from, they were in Maryland. My youngest son bought a one-way ticket from California. Of course, then he relied on me to get him back. But anyway, the other ones, who drove down from New Jersey, who drove over from Virginia. I mean, we everybody rallied, and I attribute that to, how we raised the family, and that now they're all out there, they're all grown, and I think my biggest success is that they're all out there doing great things. So in business and personally. So
You have sort of the reverse immigrant story. Here's a woman from Pennsylvania, from Italian heritage, yes, but decides there's where I've got to be. I've got to go to Italy. This is where I can flourish. Tell us a story.
tell you a story. Well, I'll give you the quick backstory of the Roseto effect because that describes it's the groundwork for everything that I do. My family comes from Roseto val Fortore, Italy, where I now live, but I grew up in the Washington, D.C. area. The first immigrants from Roseto val Fortore, Italy, landed in eastern Pennsylvania when they immigrated in the 1880s, working in the slate mines. And they were discriminated against, and so they moved off to the side, and they started their own little town, and they named it Roseto after the town in Italy, so there is a Roseto, Pennsylvania. It was the only 100% Italian town in the United States. So anyway, they lived in this little enclave for many years, and in the 1960s, the doctor serving the town told another doctor that nobody in this town had any heart disease or any other ailments, no mental illnesses, nobody was on welfare. It was a real, just kind of like a little Shangri-La. So they go to study it, and they think it's the food because that's the obvious thought, and it was not the food because they were eating salted cured meats and food fried in lard and smoking and drinking and happy and healthy. So, what was it? And they ultimately attributed their good health and longevity to their community centered, church centered, family centered life. I say it's important what's around the table, but what's on the table, but more important, what's who's around the table. And so, I started the back to the table movement. I'm on this mission to revive this phenomenon that they found there in Pennsylvania. They called the Rosetto effect, and I want to revive the Rosetto effect, the phenomena by which people live longer, healthier, happier lives by the way they live in community. Now, it doesn't just hit us personally. It goes beyond personal. It starts with the person, it starts with the family, starts with the next door neighbor and the extended family. But really, truly, where are all important things in life? Where do they all happen? They all happen at the table. And so, of course, my business is Dorina's Kitchen, and I've kept to that no matter what I do because everything important happens in the kitchen. And so I think that we need to bring that back to the forefront and get this Rosetto effect alive and big again in the United States and in Canada. I think every country that speaks English, that's where all the immigrants are, and where we've all kind of gotten separated from our heritages and our cultures and our connections and our traditions of the table.
So chaos is something that, the reason it's called chaos because it wasn't predicted. You might have a hint that might come your way, etc. What's the first step when, like, all of a sudden, like, something just floors you? It could be loss of life. It could be, and truly, like you said, it could be a momentous occasion. It could be a wedding. It could be someone got born. So if there's a momentous occasion, whether it's adverse or really positive, that can throw you off your groove, right? And how do you regain that focus? How do you gain control back?
Honestly, I know it's going to sound redundant, but I'm going to say the table. When these two tragedies hit our family this summer, okay, or this year, when we lost the baby, I was here in Italy, and my son, texts us, we're in a restaurant, and he's like, "We lost her," and and I came back to town, and it was time. It was a Sunday evening, and it was time for church, and I went. I said, "I gotta go." And I went to church and I'm crying. I can't hold it in. I'm sobbing. And I know everybody in the church because it's the whole town. And I know everybody in town because it's that small. And the thing is though, the lady sitting in front of me taught that son because she turns to me, she's like, "What's wrong?" And I said, and I told her, she goes, "Which son?" And I said, "Leo." And she said, oh, and she just reaches little teeny lady reaches over the bench and just gives me a big hug. After mass, everybody's coming up to me, talking to me, giving me hugs and kisses and giving me reassurance and then the same thing this summer when my dad died. It was just he came here on vacation and all of a sudden boom, he has a heart attack and it was the town came out, they came to see me, they told me stories, they all came to the funeral, they came to to the viewing, they had their arms around me, and I did not feel alone, and that, to me, is the essence of the Rosetto effect, because the community, the connections yeah, did it make the pain go away? No. But it made me feel less alone, and I was able to go on to the next part, and I was able to, pull a smile through the tears because somebody told me a funny little story about my dad, or, somebody told me that they also lost a baby or whatever. I shared these stories with my son and my daughter-in-law and of my sisters about my dad and all this. You know, I'm telling you, I think, loneliness is kryptonite, and I think that by starting a life around the table, it helps. It absolutely helps, and I think it works that way in business too. Just like all of our networking meetings that we go to, right? That's my church business-wise. I'm there with like-minded people doing like-minded things, supporting each other, giving each other suggestions, giving each other encouragement tips. This worked for me. Well, that didn't work for me. And that's community. Community solves lots of problems. Community is togetherness.
There's that famous concept of, whether a Billy Joel movie or whatever, of the family table bringing everyone back and music and all the pain seems to disappear for 2 hours. And then there's the Thanksgiving with too many Tell me about not being in a Disney movie, but actually using these tools to make it happen. Be where you can be real and raw and authentic, but it actually does bond.
Okay, let me be really raw and authentic. About 15 years ago, after another family tragedy, unfortunately, where we were younger and couldn't handle what happened, we lost my sister-in-law, unfortunately, to a suicide, and
Wow.
it rocked our family. And my husband was angry and withdrawn, and I was depressed and crazy, and we separated for 3 years. 3 years. But let me tell you something. One of the things that we still, through it all, held very important, held in high importance in our life, and get those words out, was Sunday dinner and taking care of the kids. And so every Sunday, my husband came home for Sunday dinner with the family. And during those 3 years of, let me tell you, it was the worst and best time of my life. Learned a lot of business, I learned a lot of personal, I learned a lot about coaching, I took lots of courses to help myself, but also then to help others. But in the meantime, that Sunday dinner was our lifeline. It was a couple hours of normal in the midst of the chaos, as you were talking about. And we feel like, both of us looking back, we've talked about it, and it's like, that was a little something that reminded him what we were supposed to be doing and how we were supposed to do it. Because I was pulling out all the stops. Of course, you know me, I'm going to cook and I'm going to cook like crazy because the first three things he asked me were, are you Italian? Can you cook? Will you marry me when we first met? So you had to keep that baby going. It really, aside from all the fun and the jokes and the fun at the beginning, going through tragedy and stuff, the table kept us together.
When you have
A lot
family, sometimes go ahead, Wayne.
a lot of business books that are autobiographical, where you know the end of the story, and when you're reading it, it seems very linear. And guess what? Life isn't. Now, one thing that interests me about your story is you're maybe not an ex, but a sort of a restaurateur by trade and you got good at it and you were growing it. And I mean, there was probably a dream, well, I want to take this national, I want a Michelin star or whatever. So it had a very focused, linear plan that you thought you had. And then you went, no, that's not the plan at all. Can you tell me about that aha moment?
Honestly, okay, I grew up in the restaurant business in a marble floor chandelier business in a restaurant in Bethesda, Maryland, right outside of DC. And it was actually named Roseto. Actually, someone just brought me this little matchbook that was from our restaurant years ago. Anyway, pretty funny. And of course, every time I got in a fight with my dad, I'd go work somewhere else. So I worked at a lot of different restaurants and bars, learning, learning, learning. Anyway, my aha moment in life about food, I think, was when one of my friends in college called me, and her last name was Murphy, so you know that she wasn't a vowel last name like me. Called me, and I was the neighborhood Italian kid who grew up in the restaurant. And she called me, she's like, "Oh, can you teach me and my college friends how to cook?" She was at a different school there in the same DC area, and she goes, "We're all broke and we can't cook and we can't eat out all the time and blah blah blah." So I did this cooking class for a bunch of college girls. I think I was 19. And I was like, "Wow, look at what I know from how I grew up that they don't know and that I was able to teach them." And it was such a good feeling even at that young age, to share what I knew that I had learned from my Italian nonna, that I had learned from the chef at our restaurant, and then my own interest. Um, it was an amazing feeling, and I've been teaching people how to cook since I was 19, off and on in the younger years. When I was earlier married, later on, I ended up, as the kids got bigger, I did classes at my house. So, like, I did some stuff with the adult school. I did it at my restaurant when I had my restaurant in New Jersey. And I continued during COVID. It turned to an online thing and started my Facebook live show and YouTube channel. So it's been a great experience. You can make a meal for someone and I can feed you once, but I can teach you how to cook and you'll eat forever. So it's kind of like, what is it? Give them what's it with the fish? Teach them how to fish, and instead of giving them a fish, so I teach them how to fish.
So a lot of circumstances, like when chaos rules the day, it's not necessarily because an accident's happened. And again, going back to birth, death, injury, etc. Sometimes it's the personalities in our life, and if they're family, it becomes you can't run away from it. It's there. How do you manage that? How do you reconcile those moments? How do you work at it so that you have peace at your end of the spectrum, perhaps all the way around?
I think that kind of like some of the lessons I learned from coaching soccer, all the years I did that, that then took me into personal coaching, life coaching, or whatever you want to, all the different things I call it, relationship coaching. It's all about relationships. When you're on a field, it's all relationships. It's the coach and the players, it's the players and the players, it's the players and the opponents. I think it's really about preparation. And so for me, the preparation in the home and then even in the business is that meet up at the table. Teamwork. Teamwork is going to be about communication. So if we're at the dinner table and one of the kids is looking kind of glum and I was like, "What's the matter?" And they say somebody was mean to me at school. I was like, "Well, let's invite them over for cookies. Let's invite them over after school and make a friend out of that kid or maybe help the bully because sometimes the bully's got more of a problem than you do." There's all kind of things that can be solved. Lots of problems can be solved at the table before they become a problem. If that kid is eating in front of you, not in their bedroom, in front of a computer, talking to like-minded negative people. So let's keep things up. Yeah, my kids will tell you all the time, "Mom, not everything is all happy, optimistic, like you are." And I'm like, "Yes, it is." And I refuse to kowtow negativity because you know what? It serves me no purpose. So, and then the other piece of it too, as any coach should do, is lead by example. I was a soccer player, and so therefore I was able to coach the players. I led by example, whether it was in how to pass a ball or just how to speak to the players. I had a great high school coach, and this one little teeny lesson has taken me so far in life. Don't tell them what they're doing wrong. Tell them how to do it better. Okay? Because first of all, if I say, we got a player on the field and they're going down the line, I say, "No, don't go down the line, cut in." I'm giving them two things to think about. And the first is a negative. Don't. Just tell them, cut to the middle. Okay. And this lesson right here, my son actually just told me the other day that his new boss is yells at. And I'm like, my son's 28 years old, and he's like, "Yo, this guy's always berating me." I'm like, "That's not how you lead." I said, "Is it who is it in the office?" And he said, "No, it's the boss." I'm like, you know, we don't get the best out of our employees by yelling at them or by telling them what they're doing wrong. Just say, "Come here. This is what I want you to do. This is how you do it better. Let me show you." Lead by example, and you will get the most out of the people working for you and the most other people. I like to say that I don't have people working for me, I have people working with me. And I try to promote that because I don't need to be the boss. They're going to see me as the one who knows what I'm doing and I'm the one that's paying them or whatever, but let's work together. It is truly about preparation, teamwork, and leading by example.
I'm going to jump in with a stereotype in my mind that I think you're going to actually make more real and more relevant. I imagine the estranged son, or you mentioned the estranged parent, and they don't say a word, but they come to the door for some reason because they think they have to. The doorbell rings. You don't even say hello. You open the door. You sit them down in front of a plate of pasta, and before the end of the pasta, something's changed. Tell me about that process and am I right? Am I wrong? Am I being facetious? Tell me about that story.
Okay, well, I don't luckily, thank God, I do not have any estranged children, nor an estranged parent, but I will tell you this, that first of all, I use that a lot because I am the ultimate Italian mama, and for some reason, the things that I say to people, I can get away with saying because 'cause they're like, "Yeah, well, she's a mom, don't mess with her," you know? There's well, I'm gonna go off course just for one split second, but, I spent many years being, quote, unquote, "just a mom." And when you're just a mom, even though I'm the serial entrepreneur, always doing something from home. I was making cakes, doing small catering jobs, coaching soccer, making jewelry, whatever it was, something to add to the home. Um, you know, I was always, that stereotype, I just never could get rid of it, and so I use it. Play into it. And I can get like I said, I can get away with kind of whatever I wanna get away with. But the thing is, there's a lot of memory. There's a lot of, I'll call it muscle memory in the brain and the taste buds in the nose that comes from food. You walk into a place, okay? We can say home, we can say somewhere else, and smells, scents can take you places. Okay. So if I want to do a business deal with somebody, I'm not taking them to a Thai restaurant because Thai food to me tastes good, but I don't like the smell of it. Okay. I'm going to take them somewhere. If I got an Italian client, I'm taking them to a good Italian restaurant where we walk in and the aromas of is going to bring back good memories and good feelings and good warmth, or maybe into a bakery where there's like that warm bread. Like, smells can really make a difference. And when I cook for people, you know, 90% of the time I'm starting with garlic or onions. And so they're always sauteing in the oil. And with one ingredient, man, the whole house smells good. If I have a business meeting at my house, I just put a little, garlic and some olive oil. The house smells great. And everybody feels like, wow, it smells so warm and inviting in here. So, yeah, I think if anybody ever has an issue with one of their kids, if we're going to take this onto the personal side, invite them home for dinner and make sure you make their favorite meal.
So, going through an adverse event, I mean, the words I'm using right now are rather neutral, right? There's no, it's just it's unfortunate, etc. But when you're going through it, it's like, oh my gosh, you feel the agony, you feel the pain. How do you take that experience and going, okay, gone through it, didn't want it, didn't ask for it, gonna happen. Sometimes, people pass on, and just, unless of course you're immortal, in which case that's a whole different podcast, and maybe Marvel Comics will kick in at that point. How do you take the pain and then convert it into, okay, I have a life lesson here. What can I pull from this and become better or stronger and better?
I think that leaning on what I've already created, for example, I mean, I hate to sound redundant, but going back to the family table, having that foundation takes me forward. These past couple weeks, after this year that started, the negative side of it, well, I started with knee surgery, but at the beginning of the year, even before everything else, but that was a good thing. But then, April and then July. And so here we are in the fall, and I am finally starting to feel a little normal. And I don't know if mentioned this already, but somebody said to me, can't wait for 2026 because they've had a crappy year also. And I said, no, you know, don't throw away, never ever wish away time. Just like when somebody says, "Oh, I'm almost 50," but they're not 50 for 2 more months. I'm like, "Don't rush it, don't throw it away. You're still 49, or whatever." I'm past that, but I'm just using a nice number to sound better. Anyway, I feel like that to me reminded me that I don't wanna get rid of time, so I'm like, "All right, how am I gonna pull this quarter out?" Because we've always gotta, sometimes we forget the things that even we do on a daily basis, you forget. Why do they say you gotta practice soccer when you're a professional? You still gotta practice even when you're a professional. You don't get there and then stop practicing. Why do we practice our faith? Because maybe we're gonna forget that today we should say a prayer for something. Everything important you gotta practice, you gotta do continually. So for me, some of my practice, some of the things that I needed to do to continue was my networking. This past week, this past 2, I guess 2 weeks now, I went on my laptop, I pulled up my email, and I started looking at all my networking emails that I get, like, like yours, and said, "Okay, Tuesday I'm gonna do this one, Wednesday I'm gonna do this one, and Thursday I'm gonna do this one." And get back in the groove, because I believe that when you are with like-minded people, whether it's around your home family table, because obviously you're a family, you're like-minded, or people in business that are, whether it's the same kind of business or a different business, we're still striving for the same thing. We're striving for some success. We're striving to take care of our families and to be in that room, even if it's virtual, with like-minded people gets me back in my groove. And that's how I continued on. Because a lot of these groups that I'm in also, I've known these people for a while. I've known you for a while. And so either some of them already knew what had been going on with me, and some of them I'm like, sorry, I haven't been here, you guys. This is why. And again, it was like I got the hugs like I got in church that day. It was virtual hugs, but it was, okay, Dorina, way to go. I'm sorry this happened, my condolences, and I'm so glad you're back. And that motivates. We need to continue to motivate each other always.
Dorina, you mentioned virtual. I was in business with Bernie a year before I'd ever seen his back. He's actually 3D. But one thing that I want to focus on is there is a myth in entrepreneuring about being hard and unforgiving. And they hold up people like Steve Jobs, and his own story very much. But your story with, you mentioned church, you mentioned spirituality, you mentioned the home, you mentioned the family. This is life learned. This isn't something you picked up at 7. Tell me about how your faith has strengthened your journey really in a real life learned way.
Wow, boy, did it. When I went through the first, the crisis 15 years ago with my husband, it was faith that got me through. And now even here, what's really kind of cool about being in Italy. Okay, so I'm the stereotype, I'm Italian Catholic. It's like everybody here is either practicing or non-practicing Catholic. And it's not, one of my best friends back in the States is Jewish. I have other friends who are Christian, other friends who are, different things. And that's fine. And we all love each other and respect each other for our differences. But it's amazing how similar we are in our differences. But here there is a comfort. There's a comfort in being around people who are like me. Next week we're having the Madonna della Consolazione feast. It's Our Lady of the Consolation. And it's only in the forefront right now because my office is right in front of the little chapel where that statue is, and they're going to process around town and have fireworks, and then they're going to have some food here in the piazza, and of course I'm going to make some food. And it is definitely a comfort being in church that night, the same day that we lost the baby. I mean, it was my first grandchild. So I have 2 grandchildren, one in heaven and one down here. But it was, faith, it grounds you, you know? After church that evening, I went into the back and talked to the priest. And I said, "I'm sorry, Pasquale's not here. He's angry." He goes, "Oh," he goes, "I know." He goes, "I've been angry at God." He goes, "I lost both my parents in 4 months' time." And he did this like fist in the air. And I'm like, you know, when you find a good priest, preacher, pastor, whatever, that can connect with you and make you feel better. It is a nice feeling because even though this guy's younger than me, I get, sometimes we feel like somebody's got to be older than you to have wisdom. And because I still think I'm 20. But I feel like there's such wisdom that can be shared and such, what's the word I'm looking for? Like just empathy. Empathy. He could truly empathize, and the compassion that he showed for me, and this guy reached over and just gave me the biggest hug, and I felt like God's arms were wrapped around me. So, yeah, do we question, why you gotta take, my first grandchild? Already she was ready to be born. You could get angry, but anger serves nothing. So, God doesn't say that he's going to prevent tragedy in our lives because things are going to happen just by the nature of the world. It's that he'll be there when you need support. And I truly believe that. And also I think that, forget anger, it's what you do with it. Yeah, you can be angry. We can be angry, but what are you going to do with that anger? You can let it eat you up, or you can take that energy and turn it outward and do something positive with it. So I think that's the same way in, like I said, in personal life and in business. And you know what? Business, we sit here and we talk about these personal things and we talk about business, and sometimes we're talking about faith, and it's like, oh, does this stuff contradict itself? But, God wants us to be successful. God wants us to be able to feed our kids and our families. My business is a business. It's also a mission. to get families back to the table. So I feel like I want to save the world one table at a time, one dish at a
I
time.
hope you've got that trademarked.
And maybe trademarking's not cheap, but yes, I'm working on that. But I think it's important in every facet of our lives, and they can coexist and they can work together.
So, Dorina's kitchen. Obviously, the word your name and the word kitchen implies food, but it's more than food now. Based on your plans, but also the experiences from this past year. Where are you heading? Do you have new projects afoot? Are you going to get into wineries?
Okay. I go to wineries, and I bring people on my groups. So I do bring so my big ticket, my big thing that I do with people is do these trips here to Italy. So we do 10-day full immersion, like you live here for 10 days. Some of the people I bring are actually of heritage of the towns, you know, descendants of those first people that went to Pennsylvania that are 3rd and 4th generation now that have never been here, and I have the honor, I'm gonna say truly an honor, to show them our town where our heritage is from. So that's beautiful, and, who better to share the Roseto effect than other Rosatani, right? But I do bring other people who wanna come to learn to cook, who want a faith experience. Our trip encompasses so much because, 90% of the art in Italy is in churches. There's beautiful church we have a little teeny town of 1,000 people, we've got 7 churches. Now, at one time, we had 7,000 people, and there was a priest in each church. We have 1 priest now for the whole town. But anyway, come here and live this little bit of a slower life and to enjoy each moment, enjoy the meals, enjoy that glass of wine with dinner, learn, what an aperitivo and, after dinner, before dinner, the digestives, all the things that we do, the homemade everything reminds us of times gone by where you can still work, still make a living, and still enjoy your life. And I see that people who enjoy their lives actually enjoy the fruits of their labors and their work. I see as happier people. I see as living longer. We had the oldest guy in Italy a couple years ago was in our town. He was 111, my friend's grandfather. Evan. He was 109 at his grandson's 50th birthday party, and he got up with his cane at 2 o'clock in the morning from the table and walked away. I'm like, wow. So my goal is 112 now. I want to beat him. But I think that it can only be a good thing. It can only be a good thing. Get to the table, start at home, take it to work.
Are there any goals that some people like to focus on certain tangible assets as goals? You know, it could be money, it can be fame, it become all consuming goals. How do you have that balance going? Yeah, I like to, I want to have enough food to eat. I want to have enough money so I can buy what I want around me. But how do you balance out going for too much versus you losing something to go for too much? In other words, you lose your identity. Because some people, they become fanatical on something, almost like there's an addiction, and everything else goes to seed. How do you provide that harmony?
I unfortunately see so much of that imbalance um, back in the States. I don't see it so much here. Here, you'll see a guy standing out in front of the cafe there, or we call it a bar. A bar here is a cafe, bar, ice cream parlor. It's a little everything. Standing out in the front of the bar, smoking a cigarette, just chilling. And you're like, what are you doing today? Nothing. Don't you have to work? Yeah, no, I'm not working today. You know, here they work to live. Over there, we live to work. Now, depends on what your work is. So for me, I did my number one job was raising my family. Okay. I believe in the role of mom. I believe it's a really important and really difficult, like master's degree kind of job. Okay. Maybe doctorate. But and I was looking for something. I was searching. I was trying different things. And all of a sudden everything came kind of like the universe swirled together and God said, okay, now's the time. Everything started to come together when my youngest kid was finishing high school. Boom. Because I had to finish that job first. Because that job, God, what did that teach? That was more than going to 10 universities. That job that I did taught me most of what I now teach other people. Okay. I needed to finish that job first. So now my focus is my business, is me. I am my brand. Dorina is I am the focus. I am the business. Do I want fame and fortune? One time I don't know, maybe I was in high school or college. I must have been, no, it was after. It was, yeah, later because I think we'd started families. Me and a friend were talking about money, and I said, I want to be filthy, filthy, filthy rich. And she looked at me like she was trying to one up me. And she goes, I just want to be comfortable, making it seem like I was, you know, greedy or selfish or something. The thing is, when I've got money, everybody's got money. I'm buying around, I'll treat everybody in the restaurant. I see somebody needs some help. I I will do things with it, and so that's why as much as I can make money, I usually don't have much left at the end of the day. But you know what? I've got a house to live in and food on my plate and people around me and we got clothes and I've got some cool shoes, that's for sure. I live in Italy. And and you know, I feel like it depends on what your focus is with that money. It's not who dies with the most money wins. It's who did the most with their money wins. I encourage people, yeah, go for it. Make all the money you can as long as it's not the pursuit of that isn't interfering with your family. But if you have a strong family, you're going to make more money because you're going to be happier and happier people produce more. Happier salespeople sell more. Happier business owners have happier employees who produce more. So you see, it really starts with the joy from home that makes everything flourish. So I'm really hardcore about this. And, like when my kids would fight, now I have 5 boys and 1 girl. She's the youngest. My 5 boys are in 6 years, so let me tell you what a wolf den that was, okay? But they would fight. They were best friends, but boy, when they fought, they fought. And I had this thing where I forced them to hug and kiss and make up. And inevitably, I still have one particular day in mind that 2 of them were hugging because I made them, and one was more mad than the other. And I said, "Kiss your brother." And the one is pulling, they're hugging, but one's pulling away. The other one's leaning in, trying to kiss him. Then they started laughing and boom, done. So hug, kiss, and make up. It always works, and be the Italian mother with a big wooden spoon.
Wooden spoon seems to be a common theme for European moms, by the way. Just FYI.
Yeah. And, all I did was wave it around. You got to, there was a lady who taught at my high school and she had 11 kids and 46 grandchildren. But she said she wrote a little book. It was called Compost Makes the Strawberries Grow. And she said, "Perfect the glare." She said, "Because you get their attention, right? And you give them the look," which I apparently have, according to my kids. And, it's their imagination. It's their imagination is your ally. Yeah, but in the meantime, you give them the look and they stop dead in their tracks. You don't insult them, you don't hurt their feelings, you don't embarrass them in front of people, you don't hit them, you don't hurt them, whatever. You just give them the look. And, to this day, it still works. That's the family
I
thing.
I
I
do
don't
hope that I do hope there's a book somewhere. I know you're on YouTube, and I know you have people retreats home to you. Who is your perfect client, and how's the best way for them to get a hold of you?
My perfect client is the imperfect person. Um, you know, this is what I'll say. Love helping people. And if someone needs help in their family relationships, in their business relationships, if you want to learn to cook and work on, because you know what? Don't tell me that anybody here, anybody listening doesn't have some relationship issues. None of us are perfect. But let me tell you, it all starts at the kitchen table. And if you learn how to cook, you're going to get people to the table. Because if you order a pizza, it's going to end up on the coffee table in front of the TV. So cook your meals, home cooked meals. And if you need help with that, I can help you. And in the process, we talk about relationships and family and business. And then, of course, if you want to come to Italy, everybody wants to come to Italy. I mean, everybody wants to be Italian. That's from my experience. That's what people tell me. I'm sorry. But my trips are enlightening. They are invigorating. You come here, you learn about yourself. You learn about, I say, come learn how to cook and learn how to live. and you go home as an ambassador for the Rosetta effect and wanting to share it. And I can't tell you how much it means to me to share this idea of coming together. It's for me, it's my joy.
You know what, Dorina? I want to say thank you so much for sharing your insights and your time today with us. To my co-host Wayne Pratt and you, the Knack for Business listeners. You know what? If you want to meet Dorina, come to these Trade Winds events. That's where she's reconnecting with us. But if you're an entrepreneur and you have a family, odds are you do. But you want to regain some focus and resilience back in that space, as upheaval will invariably happen because that's life. Unless, of course, you're totally zen, in which case you're not really impacted by much. But if you want to even understand about how to do a home cooked meal that's of Italian origin, come on in and listen to this conversation. Reach out to Dorina. She can help you, and she has much wisdom to share.
To reach the podcast hosts, email them at info@creativeinsight.com or by the website creativeinsight.com, spelled KREATIVISIGHT.com. To reach Wayne at his email, wayne@motive8u.ca, that is MOTIVE, the numeral 8 and the letter u.ca, or his website, motive8u.ca. If you would like to be a guest on this podcast and share your knowledge, let us know. We would also appreciate your feedback on the content or format. Check the show notes for more details. For these podcasts, we like to acknowledge the support and thanks to the following people. Carl Richards from Podcast Solutions Made Simple, a renowned podcast expert. Fred Crouch, who is the Property Wizard podcaster, where Bernie is a co-host. Jovan Strika from At Hive, a co-working space that is more than just a space. Then Melanie Weber, Bernie's invaluable business partner, and Wayne Pratt from Motive8U Inc., who serves as both a coach and co-host of these podcasts. Disclaimer. Please note that the Knack for Business podcast episodes are meant solely for educational and general informational purposes. The information and opinions contained within are not intended to be professional advice on any subject matter. The thoughts, views, and opinions expressed by the participants are their own personal beliefs and do not represent the views of the podcast hosts or any affiliated organizations. It is important to note that this podcast is not a replacement for consulting with certified experts in your area who possess knowledge of your unique situation. The hosts of the podcast, along with any participants or affiliated groups, do not take responsibility for any actions taken or not taken based on the information presented in this episode. It is highly recommended that individuals seek guidance from their own personal advisors in fields such as accounting, law, or other pertinent areas prior to undertaking any actions or making decisions that may impact their financial, legal, or other aspects of life.